Why is it that Hugh's related to so many famous people and nobody seems to understand that there's some serious connections going on? I can't quite see the truth, and I just don't understand exactly how that could possibly be. I'm going to go through some of the famous names. This list is going to continue to compile. It's going to continue to grow. As it does, I'm going to give you more information. Yes, I am going to be reading these names, and hopefully after you've seen this many connections, there shouldn't be any doubt any longer. Hey, Greg Rucker. There shouldn't be any doubt any longer as to who it is that Hugh Squier is. There's no way anybody can make up this much information. And when he's talking, he says the same things consistently, and he says the same things out of his head. He's not reading a book. He's not writing it down. I have to write it down. I have to read it. But when he's saying it directly out of his own head. And he says it time and time again. And he puts all these different people together. So let's just get started. And we're going to start with the Harris family. Richard Harris is directly related. I'm not going to tell you exactly how in this particular case. But he is directly related, actor Richard Harris, to Hugh. Isn't that interesting? Oh, and he was in the Harry Potter movies, the first two Harry Potter movies. And the head warlock is Squier. And then you can see a big picture on Hugh's Facebook page. If you go through he has in the Harry Potter movie, he has the picture of Squires where the head warlock trains. Of course, Hugh's last name is Squier. So he's very directly related to Richard Harris. The Harris family is very important in our nation's history because they're the ones that created the Harris steam thrasher, which gave every farmer a tractor before World War I. A very wealthy family. It was also a Harris who was standing by Abraham Lincoln when he was shot at Ford's Theater. And Hugh also used to manage the Ford Mansion in Michigan. How are all these connections possible? And so far, I've only got to my first name. Then there is the Fuller Transmission Company, through which he is directly related. And Bobby Fuller wrote, "I fought the law and the law won." His group is called the Bobby Fuller Four. You've seen Bobby Fuller on the Johnny Carson show, if you're older than I am. And Fuller gets their name from the Fuller Transmission Company, another very wealthy company. Why is the Bobby Fuller Four connected to Hugh? Not only in relation, but it's also connected by the number 4. That is Hugh's number that he talks about all the time because he had 4 of his wives murdered and was abducted as a 4-year-old and chained to the toilet into the basement of the families of 5 governors, while a bunch of musicians like Daryl Hall did intensely perverted things to him. Things that I don't want to say on here because, it wouldn't be appropriate if your kids were to hear it. Including musician Daryl Hall. Agatha Christie is Hugh's great aunt, who is related to Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, who is Hugh's cousin. Hugh is related to Stephen King, who's one of Hugh's dad's brothers, so I'd make him an uncle, I guess. Oh no, his uncle married into the family, so I'd make Stephen King his cousin by marriage. Yes, Stephen, it is going to snow tonight. Now let's talk about the Cooper name for a minute. It was a Cooper who raped Hugh's daughter. Not the only time that his daughter was raped, I think, if I remember the story correctly. Now, one of the rapists who raped Hugh when he was a 4-year-old was named Anderson. I think it was Nick Anderson, if I remember correctly. And Cooper raped his daughter. So you get Anderson Cooper on CNN, which marks both of those rapists. Remember that he was a publisher, that he made it to the top of ASCAP, that he owned a lot of property because he made a lot of money. I think he owned the biggest farm in Michigan at one point, among other properties. Then you had Alice Cooper, the rock star from East Detroit. Hugh's first wife's father was the mayor of East Detroit. And of course, you've probably seen Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory. None of these things are coincidences. Now, Hugh lived in Florida at one time, and he took pictures of little leaguers for the company that he was working at. I think it was a side job, so I'm not sure exactly how that fit into his life. But he went to the Parkland school where the Parkland shooting occurred at one time and took pictures. Isn't that interesting? What are the chances of that? Because all of these mass shootings are people marking Hugh in some way or another. The Las Vegas shooting, for example, even Sandy Hook. I believe the Parkland shooting schools, one of the reporters in one of the stories was Ryan Foley. One of Hugh's two middle names is Ryan. And then you had Foley, who was supposedly, and it looks like he was, beheaded. But Hugh has been given the pictures by apparently somebody who had remorse over what they did, is my guess and my understanding, who gave pictures of them staging the beheading. Yes, he was a real guy beheaded, but it was our government who beheaded Foley. Now, you've probably heard of H.G. Wells. H, just like Hugh, and H's mark Hugh all the time. That's why you get Preparation H and HIV. They mark diseases after him. Remember, he was made a sex object by the elite and by other publishers and by other by governors, by very famous people, and used as a sex slave. So you get Preparation H, and that's not a coincidence. Yet H.G. Wells, and Wells, a guy named Wells, was SWAT teamed and murdered while playing cards with Hugh in Warren, Michigan. Now, one of his wives' name was Victoria. You have Victoria's Secret at your mall, and her last name, Milan. If you Google Victoria Milan, you will get an escort service. Victoria's dad's name was Bill, and you get Kill Bill, as she was murdered. Think about that for a minute. Even the Beatles marks Hugh because the real term is the Beat-Ls, but nobody realizes that. So you have the L's is the line or bottom line which Hugh started, which every musician gets their start in this country. And Hugh was a publisher for the Beat-Ls or the Beatles. Okay, then Whitney Houston used to live next door to Hugh. Notice it's Houston. That's not a coincidence. And her first name is Whitney. Pratt and Whitney made aircraft engines. And Hugh also made aircraft with John Bolton. You've been hearing about him. I think sometimes he's Bob Bolton, sometimes he's John Bolton, depending on when you look at him in history. And he used to make aircrafts on the side with John or Bob Bolton, whatever you want to call him today. And one of the merchant marines on the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald in Lake Michigan. A merchant marine is a worker on a shipping vessel. And it was the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Well, his name was Whitney, And Fitzgerald, of course, is the middle name of John F. Kennedy. Now, John F. Kennedy was talking to the publishers and trying to make a point to the publishers and about how secret societies should have no place in America right before he was murdered. Essentially, he was talking to Hugh. Put it all together. Yeah, that's a lot of pieces, isn't it? That's why you should take this video, you should stop and rewind it, and you should write it down. All right. Then you had two attorneys who were murdered as they tried to report and file charges against the murderers of some of Hugh's wives, Hunter DeStair and Mr. Ballman. One was murdered in the 1980s and one in 2011. Hugh is currently seeking to raise funds if anyone will help. If you get this message and you can help raise funds, to hire an attorney, hopefully one who can defend himself. Joe Jacobs, Hugh's father-in-law, gave Bill Gates the software to make the first home computer. Do you see that how there's a lot of wealth? How is it that Hugh has all these connections and knows all this stuff? Well, he's related to them. His childhood doctor was Dr. Barker. About the same time you got Bob Barker on The Price is Right. What are the chances? Remember that he was marked time and time again by the publishers and by those who were grooming him to do as a sex slave, but also to be their submissive servants, that they were grooming him probably to be president of the United States, he believes. The most famous person named Hugh on the internet, if you type in Hugh in your browser, you'll get Hugh Jackman. Not a coincidence that he's so popular right now. You have Rush Hugh or Hudson Limbaugh. Notice the Hugh in the middle of that. Rush Limbaugh was a drug dealer at one point in his life. He dealt heroin or Oxycontin, or maybe a little both, or maybe just Oxycontin and perhaps not the heroin. Both are powerful opioids. And his relative, Mark Mothersbaugh, was murdered by the drugs that Rush Limbaugh sold. Hugh used to publish for George Carlin, and if you look in Hugh's pictures, you will see that George Carlin was talking to Johnny Carson while wearing a big H on the back of his shirt. That's because he was marking Hugh as his publisher. Of course, you had Hugh Hefner and Huey Lewis in the news. You had Hugh Grant as Hugh, working for ASCAP, the American Society of Authors. Let's see, American Society, I forgot what the C stands for, of Authors and Publishers. And whatever the C stands for. My brain just farted on me. Well, while Hugh worked for them, he gave out grants, and you get Hugh Grant. You had Hugh Hewitt as a Washington Post reporter, and Caitlin Huey Burns, the CBSN reporter. None of these are coincidence. Hugh basically ran, or not ran, but basically owned Fox News before it became Fox News under Rupert Murdoch. We talked last time about Huey Hudson from South Bend, Indiana, the same place where we currently have a gay presidential candidate who no doubt was also groomed to run for this position by the same gay pedophiles who attacked Hugh. This is not a coincidence. They murdered him on 1/27 of this year, 127, like World Trade Center's 127. While you have a president called Peter Buttigieg, ha ha ha, yeah, that's the gay pedophiles making fun of stupid Americans from South Bend. Put it together. So Huey Hudson was murdered in South Bend. You have Howard Hughes, the aviator, and who was talked about on 9/11 just before the first plane hit the tower. Matt Lauer was interviewing the guy who was making a movie about Howard Hughes, the aviator. I bet nobody knew anything who put that together about what was about to happen. I think it's interesting that Hubbard, like L. Ron Hubbard and another Hubbard that we might all know, starts with Hugh. Coincidence, or did somebody put that together? I don't know. Now, you had the soundtrack in the movie Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel. The soundtrack was in the movie The Graduate. Dustin Hoffman was in The Graduate. Now, yes, I am reviewing stuff from my last video, but obviously I'm putting a lot more into it too. Dustin Hoffman came out in 1967 in The Graduate. And in 1976, the same numbers reversed. You had Hoffa killed. You could say that they dusted him off. And you got Dustin Hoffman. You think that was planned in advance, probably by Ed Asner, the Ukrainian, who brought with him a whole bunch of movie stars from the Ukraine, where all the conflict is going on right now, where everybody's getting the payola and graft, and where Rand Paul's kids and John Kerry's kids and who else? Nancy Pelosi's kids are all getting their payola right now. Oh, you got an impeachment because Trump tried to interfere and get some of that payola for himself. You see what happened? So you got a cover-up story. Oh, yeah. Well, they couldn't tell you the exact truth because they're all guilty. So they wanted to find another way to get around and try to impeach him, to say, get away from our money. That's what the impeachment was about. Don't get that mixed up. Don't buy the lies you see on Fox News that Hugh used to almost run. So Hugh's baby pictures have II and IV, which are Roman numerals for 2 and 4 on it. And let's just go into those numbers for a second. 2, 4. Because that's not a coincidence. They've marked him with those numbers his whole life. Well, what is 2, 4? Well, it's George Washington's birthday. And remember, they were grooming Hugh to probably be the president. But he didn't want it. He wasn't trying to be. The Confederate States were founded on 2, 4. And on 2, 4 in 1783, Sweden recognized U.S. independence. Isn't that interesting? In 1968, on 2, 4, U.S. troops divide Viet Cong troops at Hue, H-U-E, in Vietnam. But I'm sure it's just a coincidence. In 1972, on 2, 4, the U.S. sold 42, the same numbers in reverse, F-4 Phantom jets to Israel. So on 2, 4, they sold 42 jets to Israel. And remember that Hugh owned Bibi Street, and now you have Bibi Netanyahu, which is how he used to pronounce it too, by the way. Now, Sandy Hook took place on 12/14. We're talking about 2 and 4. Take out the 1 and the 1, and you are left with 2 and 4. Now you have the Parkland shooting was on 2/14. Again, take out the 1, and you have the 2 and the 4. This all started because Hugh's baby pictures had the 2 and the 4 on the back of them. And the pictures were taken by Mr. Towers. Remember that Hugh's business licenses were stolen and covered up by the events of 9/11 when the towers were destroyed, and 2 other times in Hugh's life as he dealt with a Mr. Towers or a Dr. Towers. not by coincidence. Now, Hugh used to run the Acme Cleveland, or used to work in the Acme Cleveland Corporation. I think he ran it, where he terminated a lot of wire connections, one of his jobs, with J.C. Christensen, who built the Georgia Guidestones. Alex Jones lies to you about the Georgia Guidestones all the time and gives you a false explanation for what the Georgia Guidestones mean. Yes, there are 10 supposed commandments on there, and one of them does say that the population of the world should be maintained under 500 million. However, Hugh knew J.C. Christian personally. He changed it to R.C. Christensen on the monument to make it a little more difficult for people to trace him. Okay, people do that. Hugh made a vast amount of money for J.C. Christensen. That's how he had so much money to build the Georgia Guidestones. He worked for J.C. Christensen, I believe at Acme Cleveland, as he terminated wire connections through Brady cables or connectors. You got the Brady Bunch and the Terminator out of that over the years, not at the same time. Al Capone's family went to school with Hugh. Do you think maybe somebody might have designed that in connection with everything else that's going on? How else would Hugh know that Al Capone is now changed his name, his family changed their name to Rutledge. The Rutledge family, by the way, just became the CEOs and operators of Disney World. And you wonder why there's so many pedophiles being caught at Disney World. Hugh lived for 20 years with the Simpson family. And not long after, you got the cartoon, The Simpsons. About 10 years later, after he wasn't there anymore. Hugh's mother's sister, Annabelle, stole his inheritance. And you got Annabelle the doll. And isn't that interesting? One day, Hugh was walking and somebody walked up to him, a small kid, an unknown Italian kid. And right after that, he found out that, right after he talked to this kid, he had just found out that Hoffa was killed. And then that kid turns around and becomes, he's not a kid, but like, a young man, turns around and becomes the leader of the Teamsters Union for a few weeks after Jimmy Hoffa died. Remember that Hugh had just joined the Teamsters, and that Hugh was also arrested for the murder, not arrested, but detained by the FBI for the murder of Jimmy Hoffa. And yet you never hear about him in any of the books? You mean the FBI can actually detain you, but you're not in any of the stories? No, because they're all part of the cover-up and the lies run by the pedophile media who did these terrible things to him. You had, for example, Major Garrett, who worked for CBS. Major Garrett would buy computers from Hugh's computer repair business that he was running about 10 years ago. And Major Garrett also worked as the White House correspondent for, who was president in 2011? Obama, I guess. Yeah. And Major Garrett sent him the computers that had Hillary's emails on them. That's where those computers disappeared to. And when he didn't get them back, when he wanted, somebody broke in and stole the computers. Imagine that. And Hugh figured out what was going on in the meantime. Now, Hugh lived for a while in Tennessee at the Manning Ranch. Well, Major Garrett of CBS, who destroyed Hugh's computers, who sent him Hillary's emails, 30,000 emails that she supposedly deleted, that's because they were at Hugh's house. Because Major Garrett, who worked as the White House correspondent, sent them there. Well, this Major Garrett released a story while Hugh lived at the Manning Ranch of Bradley Manning, who later became Chelsea Manning. A story about, oh, guess what? A tranny. Think the gay pedophile agenda had anything to do with this? Now, one of the people that took the payments at the Manning Ranch earlier, when he first was paying for the Manning Ranch, his name was Woody. At the same time, you got Toy Story, where the main character's name was Woody. And two of his wives were murdered there. So we already talked about Victoria Milan. If you Google Victoria Milan, you'll get an escort service, and Victoria's Secret. And the other wife was, let's see, Terry. Terry died there, but another one of his wives, it reminded me of Fredericks, and you got Fredericks of Hollywood, but she didn't die at that Manning Ranch, though. They didn't all die at the same time. These were over 30 years that all these people died. But the two at the Manning Ranch were in around 2004 and 2011. Now, as Hugh was trying to get his story and a police report and try to get the police to take reports, Al Akers was assigned as a homicide detective to the case. Instead, Al Akers screwed his wife and named his kid Hugh Squier. Oh, and never paid child support. He was supposed to protect Hugh. Why? Because they were poisoning his food and his drinks and stealing his cars and airplanes. Imagine how much they've taken from Hugh Squier. Quite a bit. Hugh knows David Icke personally, the man who talks about the reptilian story. Hugh had encounters with that sort of thing. He doesn't like to talk about it, but he says, listen, I saw what I saw, whatever, he doesn't say what it is or what he saw. He says, I don't know what it was, but David Icke took that story, and all this you hear on the internet is just because Hugh talked about it a few times privately. He said, I saw something like that once. So David Icke took that story, and now he's the guy known for all about reptilians, and the Queen of England's a reptilian and all this nonsense. And Hugh says all that's nonsense. He said, I saw something and I don't know what it was. I mean, what are you going to say about that, Jim Mars, the famous conspiracy writer guy, very famous, died mysteriously of a heart attack. Hugh says he was almost certainly murdered, and that was the cover story, because Jim Mars had just offered to write Hugh's biography, and Coast to Coast was writing a story about Jimmy Hoffa at the same time. Now, Jim Mars, had he wrote that story at the same time, would have stolen a whole lot of thunder from that book, and he ends up dead right after that. Put two and two together. Coast to Coast possibly had something to do with that, couldn't they have? Now, one person that you see on Coast to Coast, the guy with the big afro hair, Giorgio Tsoukalos, if you look on Hugh's page, they know each other. Okay, they were together. They show pictures. Hugh wearing that shirt with the Wookiee on there, Chewbacca from Star Wars. Okay, and he's taking a picture with Giorgio Tsoukalos because part of Star Wars was filmed on Hugh's property in Michigan. Now, we talked about Cooper a little bit before, about Alice Cooper, about Anderson Cooper. Well, it was D.B. Cooper who had kidnapped Hugh's kid off the school bus, and they were going to kill her and bury her. I think it was in a junkyard, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, but he rescued her. He rescued his kid. And they tried to sue some of the people responsible. And the case, unfortunately, failed because the judge probably, in my opinion, was probably paid off because he took an impossible scenario and went with it and ruled against them. Imagine that. So you have D.B. Cooper who did that. And the FBI gave you a story about another D.B. Cooper to run your attention away in case you were to ever Google the names D.B. Cooper or something like that. You wouldn't want anything leading back to Hugh, because Hugh's story will lead you back to the JFK assassination, will lead you to the Jimmy Hoffa murder, will lead you to 9/11. How you doing, Earl? Well, the FBI gave you the story about a fake D.B. Cooper, but if you Google it, this is the story you'll get. He hijacked an airplane and jumped into the Rogue River. Now, Hugh knows both the Armstrong and Aldrin family as well when he was young, and his family knew those two families. He also went to church with Walt Disney, and Walt Disney told Hugh that he would mark his birthday on Herbie the Love Bug, number 53, because Hugh was born in 1953. Now, Jesse Ventura used to own property right next to Hugh. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was near the Manning Ranch, but I could be wrong about that. Jesse Ventura is one of the liars, one of the Alex Jones types, giving you false information. You know, Alex Jones sent child porn to the San Diego victims and tells you lies about the Georgia Guidestones that Hugh helped pay for through J.C. Christensen, by helping J.C. Christensen become very wealthy. It was Hugh's inventions at the Acme Cleveland Corporation and other places that helped make J.C. Christensen very wealthy. So you have Alex Jones and Jesse Ventura, who live next to him and who know Hugh, who lie regularly about Hugh's truths. Jesse Ventura is now on Russian TV. Think about the payola and the graft coming from Ukraine. You say struggling. I don't know. Is that you, Earl? Are you saying you're struggling with hearing me? Is my voice not coming across clear, or are you talking about something else, bud? Maybe I'll go closer to the microphone. Well, isn't it interesting that Russian TV reporter or contributor Sean Davis runs in America the internet campaigns for Rand Paul, and you wonder if Russia is involved in U.S. elections. Well, who runs Russian TV? All the state of Russia, because everything in Russia is run by the state. You have Jesse Ventura helping there and contributing in there. Oh, and Jesse Ventura just happened to be the governor of Minnesota, where one of Hugh's wives was kidnapped from. One of the wives that helped create the Head Start program, which was adopted later by Ronald Reagan. So we wonder if, does Russia have any connection here in Ukraine? Well, yeah, the Ukraine creates uranium. That's why Ukraine sounds like uranium. That's not a coincidence. We had the atomic plant there where Greg worked there. That's listed there. I'm named after my dad there their whole lives. My grandpa worked there. And then you had the Rodin family murdered, who was connected to the Wagners, Elvis Presley's family, and another connection to Hugh. And that's not a coincidence. That was your Russian mafia coming and killing people, making it clear to John Kasich that he better get the heck out of the presidential race. And he did get the picture because a week later he was out. And probably most of the other people and that old lady, Mrs. Wagner, that you hear on the internet crying about her kids probably has no idea that that's what happened. And by the way, she's from where I grew up, in Lucasville. Let's see. So Hugh knew Kathy O'Brien. He knew her father. Okay, Kathy O'Brien is the lady going out talking about the MK Ultra program, which is not true. It is another lie, another disinformation campaign. There were things that go on in the military that were somewhat like MK Ultra. There was a program a little bit like that at one point. But Kathy O'Brien is lying to you about being in the MK Ultra program. Okay, Hugh knew her father personally. Kathy O'Brien worked with Roseanne Barr, okay, and helped her get her start, probably through Senator Graham's radio in Detroit. That's speculation. But Senator Graham does own radio stations and is part of the gay pedophile agenda. So, let's see. You have Michael Osborne, who's currently chief of the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children's Unit in the FBI. Isn't it interesting that it was an Osborne who was one of the rapists who took Hugh when he was a 4-year-old boy and raped him? One of the families of one of the Michigan governors. Are they connected to the overseas Osbornes? Probably. What do you think? The one from Britain? Yeah. You have Ozzy Osbourne and the Wizard of Oz. Okay. And the Wizard of Oz, you have the Wallace family. The Wicked Witch of the West her last name was Wallace, and so was the Scarecrow. I think the girl married into it. The Wicked Witch of the West was Hugh's kindergarten teacher, and she used to give him over to the pedophiles after school to be raped. That's the truth of what's going on in your country. It's unfortunate that we got disconnected. I never know if it's just basic internet problems. There is a lot of snow. There's no way of knowing though if they really don't like this information getting out. So I don't know if they're disconnected. It's really weird. I was talking to Hugh one time, and Hugh was recording something while I was talking to him on his phone, and he was playing. Okay, he was playing a phone with my voice on it. Okay, next to his speaker, just like this. Okay, and while he was doing it, I could hear my voice echoing back, so I know it was going in the microphone. It was being recorded. However, when we played back the video, everything I said was gone and deleted from the video. I don't even know how that's possible. Okay, because his voice was going into the same microphone and being recorded. So you can know for a fact that they are manipulating this stuff. There's no question in my mind that they're doing that. Well, anyway, we were talking about Osborne, and Michael Osborne is the chief of the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children's Unit, and he is related to the pedophile group that abducted Hugh. And isn't it interesting that one of the Osbornes runs the radio station, runs Senator Graham's radio station, has a program on there in Detroit right now. What are the chances of that? Do you see a connection between Senator Graham and the pedophile groups? I do. Now let's talk about Timothy McVeigh for a second. Isn't it interesting that that story there is related to the drugs that were being run Noriega's drugs that were being taken. Okay, this is how it works, okay? We would give weapons to Noriega just like Obama and Fast and Furious would give weapons to Mexico in exchange for drugs, and the FBI would run the drug program off of Hugh's property, at least in Noriega's case, not with Obama's case here. Or is it the same? I can't remember the timeline, so I can't remember when this happened. Okay, well, some of the FBI agents who ran these drug operations on Hugh's property were Timothy McVeigh and Nichols. And another person, one of those people, started QAnon. Well, Timothy McVeigh, of course, you know him. They had him killed by staging him in the Oklahoma City bombing incident, along with Nichols. All these are people that Hugh stopped from selling drugs on his own property. Isn't it interesting that Hugh is related to the Harris family? That the Harris family, like we said, was with Lincoln at Ford's Theater when he was killed. And there are an awful lot of Harris publishing companies to this day. Just Google them and you'll see them. All right. And let's see. Hugh is also related to Admiral Byrd. You have an awful lot of people who say that they have uncovered Admiral Byrd's diary. And Hugh says that's a load of crap. What they're doing is they're taking notes from Hugh's stuff and twisting it and changing it and telling you that they had Admiral Byrd's diary. Byrd did not discover a hollow earth. That is all BS and misdirection. And I think, I believe Admiral Byrd is one of his uncles or cousins. I can't remember exactly. He was also related to the pilot of the Enterprise. And so you got the Enterprise on Star Trek. Not a coincidence. All right. Well, I was almost done. It's too bad that I lost connection just a few minutes before I was finished. So that's an awful lot of connections. More than, that, and I'm just getting started. He talks like this for hours, okay? Hours and hours and hours to put together connections in ways that are absolutely amazing. And he's not putting them together out of some theory. This is just stuff he lived. He's seeing all that stuff that I just talked to you for an hour about. He's doing it from memory. Okay? If you're just lying and making up crap, you can't do that consistently, time and time and time again. It's impossible. So, anyway, I just wanted to once again give you the truth of Hugh Squier, what really happened on 9/11, and the pedophiles that are running this country that are connected to all of our politicians, from Mr. Secondly, Senator Graham, to all the people you think are good Christian people in government. No, most of them are pedophiles. Okay, a lot of them are. We're connected in some way to pedophile groups or to drug rings. Like the FBI running drugs on Hugh's property, running child sex slaves, and Hugh was one of them, so he knows what really happened. So that's the truth. Don't let Alex Jones, don't let Jesse Ventura, don't let the liars misdirect you. Don't let Hubbard misdirect you, Mr. L. Ron. Okay? Zach Hubbard is literally telling you the same lies that Alex Jones and Jesse Ventura are saying. I heard him saying the lies about the Georgia Guidestones in just his last video. He's misdirecting you. And probably by design. He may or may not know that he's misdirecting you. I don't know, but it doesn't make any difference. A lie is still a lie. And when he had the chance to know Hugh and to learn the truth, when all this truth that I just gave you walked right in front of him, he rejected it and didn't want anything to do with it. How do you have patience with somebody that's that blind? I don't know. Uh, I don't. I know one thing. You don't make him your truther like you do, like you would. Don't set him up as your truther like you would uh, Assange. Convicted pedophile Assange. Don't make somebody who's giving you a lie. Edward Snowden, who's giving you lies or being misdirected by forces above them that they don't understand. Don't make those people your truthers. Okay? Don't make Hubbard your truther. He's being misdirected by the same forces as Snowden and Assange. So don't make him your truther. He's misdirecting you. He's lying to you. Whether he understands it or not, I don't know. I don't really care. A lie is still a lie. So thanks for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe.